Today's episode is going to be about a very nifty, very usable device, the FloppyEMU, made by Big Mess O Wires, or BMOW as they're commonly known. They've been around for years and provide nifty products such as a replacement ROM sim for the Mac SE30, the ADB to USB Wombat input converter, and other kinds of stuff for Apple II and Mac computers alike. I have two reasons why I'm covering this today in July of 2023. The first is the obvious one, and is meant to help owners of vintage Macs struggling to do something with their failing machine, failing hard disk, failing floppy disk drive, and whatnot, especially if they're new to the scene of owning these old machines. There's an endless stream of new Mac owners stumbling upon a Mac Plus or a Mac SE and wondering how to get past the flashing question mark disk insert icon as they got their computer without any hard disk or bootable floppies. It seems that every other week, Vintage Mac Groups has the same kind of post asking for help about this. The FloppyEMU is a no-brainer tool that solves that problem completely and elegantly and gives you a lot of utility for the price. It's hard to beat in terms of just getting your darn old 68K Mac thing to load a functional OS. This is simultaneously old news for anyone who's been around the vintage Mac community for a bit, but also evergreen useful news to keep at the forefront for newcomers. Do check that out if you find yourself in that situation. So that was a quick public service announcement and completes the first reason why I'm making this video. The second reason I'm covering this is relatively recent, December 2022 to be exact. Not many people know this, and I feel even seasoned veterans of vintage Macintosh owners have not been informed of this huge new functionality, which is support for .moof files. This was announced on BMOW in a blog update on December 3rd, 2022, and I feel a lot of people missed it. Link down below. Allow me to summarize it for you. The FloppyEMU regular Macintosh mode of support are .dsk, easily usable in emulators as well, for disk files, or .img for disk image files made with disk copy version 4.2. Both ranging all the way from 400 kilobytes single-sided all the way to 1.4 megabytes high density if your Mac supports it. Here's the chart in the FloppyEMU documentation if you're curious. The new and shiny feature is the support for .moof files, which simply put is a better capture of 3.5-inch floppy disks that can include copy protection information. MOOF is the Macintosh equivalent to WAS files for those familiar with it on the Apple II. It contains not only the logical data that the Mac reads, but also low-level, on a bit basis of the surface of the disk, including empty space, the disk headers, and footers. It needs specialized AppleSauce hardware in order to capture, and many people own that device and are actively imaging original disks with it. MOOF supports 400K, 800K, and 1.4 megabyte Mac disk images. However, due to memory limitations on the FloppyEMU CPLD, the latter is currently not supported. But that's okay, as the first two come from 1984 to 1989 mostly, which is the era where so many pieces of software were laced with copy protection. When you consider the general failure rate of magnetic-based media of all kinds, paired with the inability to easily produce backup copies of copy-protected software you purchased, MOOF files would have been absolutely amazing to have back then in the 80s. It's still massively useful today in the 21st century, as there's a big push for software archival purposes, and many of these softwares are still turning up from people's forgotten collections and being imaged for all to enjoy the history of computing. The MOOF file format has been developed by John K. Morris and has been usable by the MAME emulator since September 2022 as of version 0.248 or later. MAME is better known as an excellent arcade game emulator and has been around for ages. It's less known for emulating Macs. Other people have been evangelizing the MOOF format, such as 4AM, originator of the MOOF-A-Day early Macintosh software found on archive.org, and Ryan Bauman, who has been churning out MOOF-A-Day as well as Apple II-based Was-A-Day videos on YouTube, testing out various games, productivity software that were archived since last year. So, as of today, your options to run MOOF in emulation are restricted to MAME. Mini-vMac does not support it, as well as Basilisk II and SheepShaver, who do not support it. The Infinite Mac's website is based on those last three, so it does not support it either. As for the hardware side of things, the only option is the FloppyEMU and nothing else. None of the modern SCSI replacement can support it, which includes the Blue SCSI version 1 or 2, Pi SCSI, Zulu SCSI, or SCSI 2SD. They aren't really trying to emulate floppy disk images, to be fair, but are more concerned about hard drive and CD-ROM images, which they do very well. In my opinion, the convenience of the FloppyEMU is hard to beat, and it's absolutely useful to own, even if you're already set up with, say, a Blue SCSI for your larger file needs. If you are into trying out the olden pieces of Mac software, the FloppyEMU hardware solution is your best bet. We're talking software that was forced upon floppy disk detection during runtime. Sometimes they wouldn't even allow you to transfer them over the very first pricey Mac hard disks. It was seldom assumed that most consumers would not own those in the first couple of years of the Macintosh. Now, if you want to make sure your FloppyEMU supports that format, you fall in either of two categories. If you recently purchased a FloppyEMU, chances are your firmware already supports it, but we'll make sure of that in a moment. If you've had a FloppyEMU since 2022 or before, then you'll have to perform these easy steps. First, you have to go to the website and navigate to the product page. The latest and greatest firmware will always be somewhere near the bottom of the page, clearly marked with a timestamp. One file you may want to pay close attention to before updating is changes.txt. Check the date of your current fmu.bin, compare it with the entries in changes.txt that follow it to get a sense of the novelties you'll get. Then it's just a matter of copying the new fmu.bin to the root of your FloppyEMU's microSD card. As can be seen in the most recent versions of changes.txt, you need to have a December 1st, 2022 firmware to be able to read MOOF files, and at least a December 21st, 2022 to write to them as well. Once copied over, cleanly unmount your microSD card and replace it inside the FloppyEMU. Next time you power up your Macintosh, hold down the Select and Previous buttons on the FloppyEMU. While they are still held down, press and release the Reset button, and finally let go of Select and Previous when the firmware update process begins. It should take no more than 10 to 15 seconds for the process to complete, and the status LED will be flashing. And the version date should be pretty obvious in the splash screen. As you can see, I've created a dedicated folder for my downloaded MOOF files. Let's try one just now. A title that was really hard to find in regular emulation packages. It seemed like I stumbled upon modified, incomplete, or buggy versions of Pinball Construction Set from Electronic Arts from the halcyon days of EA. As you can see, no problem at all running that thing, and it looks and feels exactly like back in the day. Now, a warning. The MOOF disk archiving is not perfect. It's a passion project from hobbyists, and it's pretty darn fantastic in my opinion already, and solves a problem that had no solution since the 80s. Some rare games are refusing to work fully, and these problems are being worked on. It's definitely possible to contribute, as I did, by asking around who was local to me and was willing to use his AppleSauce hardware gear to extract an original copy of a disc of mine. It was this game, Déjà Vu, but not from ICOM Simulations, not the graphic adventure game, the other title, a memory game from Rubicon Publishing that I've seen nowhere for ages. So, after a few days of round-trip shipping within Canada, I had a functional, disinfected MOOF file of it. Finally, I could stop worrying about the health of my original disk. I know today's topic is pretty niche, but I believe we can agree that this has significant computer history importance, which was my main goal for this video. If you like this tour of this file format which merits wider attention and would like to find out more about old Macs, especially black and white ones, consider letting the algorithm know about that and stay tuned for more videos on these machines. In a future one, I'll describe my use case for other pieces of useful equipment for my Macs, like the Blue SCSI storage solution, the RGB to HDMI video leeching setup I've got going. If you haven't watched my earlier video on USB 4 VC, I invite you to check out the recent wild stuff that's now possible with it. Bye for now, I'll see you next time.